In the mists of Middle-earth's past lies a story seldom told. We often hear tales of heroes and light, but tonight we turn our gaze to the shadows, to the misunderstood origins of the orcs. This is a history not of glory, but of mythic tragedy, a forgotten lore where the very memory of a people was shaped by hardship and sorrow. By the end of our journey, you will understand the profound tragedy of their creation, a story lost to time. What twisted a race born from light into creatures of such darkness, and could their fate have ever been different? Wherever you are in the world right now, and whatever the hour, feel free to share your corner of the world with me. What does the word monster truly mean to you? Their first moments were bathed in starlight alone. On the shores of the lake of Cuvianen, the elves opened their eyes to a world of quiet wonder, the very first of their kind. They did not yet know language, only the profound beauty of the stars above and the gentle lapping of water. Their hearts were filled with a pure, unspoiled joy, and their first true expression was not speech, but song. This music was not crafted or learned, it simply was, a spontaneous echo of the world's own hidden melody. They wandered the shores with a sense of discovery, touching the bark of trees and marveling at the coolness of stone, their existence a perfect harmony with the untouched earth. This was the beginning, a state of grace and innocence that would become the foundation for an immense and lasting sorrow, for their light was too brilliant to remain unseen. A shadow had already taken notice. Far to the north, in the fortress of Utumno, the Dark Lord Morgoth felt the awakening of this new light. He, who had once been of the divine order, but was now consumed by a desire to dominate all of creation, coveted the elves. He did not wish to admire their light, but to possess it, to twist it into a tool for his own terrible purposes. Their songs of joy, carried on the winds, were to him a siren's call, drawing his gaze and solidifying a dark ambition. The safety of this first dawn was an illusion, a fleeting peace before a storm. The stakes could not have been higher, for the purity of an entire race now hung in the balance. But where light shines brightest, shadow gathers deepest, and a terrible purpose began to stir in the north. From the cold stone of Utumno, a new kind of purpose began to flow into the world. This was not the music of creation, but a harsh and dissonant counter-melody. Morgoth, in his jealousy, sought not to build upon the world as it was, but to break it and remake it in his own image. His was the first will to dominate, to force life into shapes it was never meant to hold. In those deep chambers, the very concept of nature was first violated, as living things were bent and broken, not for survival, but for a cruel and twisted art. This marked the beginning of a cosmic struggle, a fundamental conflict between the creative will that had sung the world into being, and this new, destructive will that sought only to mar its beauty. And Morgoth saw in the elves the ultimate material for his grim designs. Their inner light, their capacity for joy and song, represented everything he could not possess, and was therefore determined to corrupt. He watched the shores of Cuvianen, waiting patiently as their curiosity led some to wander just a little too far from the safety of the group. When the moment was right, his dark servants swept in. The stakes in that single act were immense, for the fate of these few individuals was now tied to the fate of all Middle-earth. Their capture was not merely a loss, it was the beginning of a long and sorrowful experiment. Thus, the first captives were taken into the deep pits, where light and song were forgotten. The deep caverns of Angband became their entire world, a realm where starlight was a forgotten memory. Here, the captured elves faced not just physical hardship, but a profound spiritual assault. Their captors understood that to truly break a being of light, one must first extinguish the song within its spirit. Over long, sorrowful years, their fair forms were slowly reshaped by dark arts and relentless hardship, a cruel distortion of the grace they once knew. This internal conflict was the true heart of their torment, a desperate struggle between their inherent love for beauty and the overwhelming shadow being forced upon them. Morgoth, with his lieutenant Sauron directing the grim work, made a deliberate and terrible choice. They would not merely imprison these firstborn, they would use them as the raw material for a new race, one born entirely from a will to dominate. The stakes in this act were cosmic, challenging the very nature of creation itself. For the first time, a people were being fashioned not from love or a desire for life, but from pure hatred and a need to control. From this prolonged and sorrowful process, a new and grim people finally began to crawl into the bitter light of Middle-earth. They were no longer elves, but something new and terrible. The first generation of orcs crawled from the deep pits, their forms a permanent echo of the torment they had endured. Where there was once starlight in their eyes, now there was only a simmering shadow, a deep-seated confusion and rage directed at the very world that had cast them out. They looked upon the beauty of Middle-earth not with wonder, but with a bitter, instinctual loathing, for it was a beauty they could no longer comprehend and were now commanded to destroy. Morgoth gave them a single, brutal purpose, a command that would echo through their bloodline for ages: multiply, spread, and leave nothing beautiful or free untouched. In that moment, the free peoples of the world gained a permanent enemy, a race whose entire existence was an act of war against creation itself. The conflict was no longer just about territory or power, but a fundamental struggle between that which builds and that which only seeks to break. And so they multiplied, a tide of ruin flowing from the Iron Mountains. These new legions of orcs were hurled against the free peoples in a series of conflicts that would scar the very geography of the world. The great battles of Beleriand were not fought for honor or for land in any simple sense, but as a brutal expression of a dark will. The orcs formed the endless ranks of Morgoth's armies, a tide of shadow sweeping across the plains and into the wooded realms of the elves. They fought with a ferocity born not of courage, but of a deep and abiding fear. To falter in their master's service meant a return to the torments of Angband, a fate more terrible than any battlefield. This fear twisted into a grim desire to see the light in others extinguished, to make the beautiful world share in their own marred existence. Every burned forest and shattered city was a testament to this cycle, a physical manifestation of their inner anguish projected outward. In response, the noble elf lords made a fateful choice. Leaders like the High King Fingolfin saw only an unreasoning tide of destruction, a mindless evil that had to be met with relentless force. Their decision to answer Shadow with brilliant, open war was understandable, a defense of all they held dear. Yet this very defense cemented a tragic perception, defining the orcs forever in the eyes of their foes as a scourge to be eradicated, not a people to be understood. Each clash of swords, each life lost on both sides, drove the wedge of hatred deeper, making the idea of future peace an impossible dream. The orcs were hardened by generations of conflict, their original sorrow buried under layers of ingrained malice and survival instinct. And as the long years of the First Age wore on, the instruments of this shadow would find new hands to wield them. Yet even in his defeat, Morgoth cast a long shadow. His greatest servant, the Lieutenant Sauron, had survived the final war, where his master had ruled through raw terror and brute force. Sauron wielded a far more subtle and enduring power. He understood the deep-seated needs of the scattered orc tribes, their instinct for a leader, and their bitter hatred of the world that rejected them. To these broken people, he offered a terrible gift, a renewed sense of purpose under his singular banner. His control was not merely a chain of command, but a web of psychological mastery, promising order in exchange for absolute loyalty. He gave them a new home, a land as harsh and unforgiving as they were. In the ash-choked plains of Mordor, surrounded by jagged mountains, Sauron made his fateful decision. He would raise a fortress to eclipse all others, the Dark Tower of Barad-dûr. Its foundations were woven with sorcery, a structure meant to endure for ages, and it became the grim heart of his growing power. From this central stronghold, the orc legions were no longer just scattered raiders. They were forged into a disciplined and strategic force. The stakes for all free peoples escalated dramatically, for now the shadow had a single, brilliant mind guiding its hand. In the fires of Orodruin, a new darkness was forged, and the orcs were its steel. Life in Mordor was a brutal, sunless rhythm. Each day began not with a song, but with the crack of a whip and the guttural shouts of overseers. Their drills were relentless, a constant practice of violence meant to hone their natural aggression into a precise instrument of war. The very air they breathed was thick with the sulfurous fumes from Mount Doom, and their meals were a foul, unidentifiable paste that did little more than keep them standing. In this world, kindness was a fatal weakness, and trust was a foolish gamble. The only law was the law of the stronger orc. Bitter rivalries festered between the larger, more disciplined Uruk-hai and the smaller, more numerous Snaga, the common foot soldiers. These conflicts simmered constantly, a low hum of violence that could erupt into a bloody brawl over a scrap of better food or a perceived insult. This internal chaos was not an accident of their society. It was a feature of it. Sauron's lieutenants allowed it, even encouraged it, for it kept the tribes divided and their attention focused on each other instead of their master. To survive in this environment, an orc had to make a terrible choice every single day. They had to become more cunning, more ruthless, and more cruel than the orc next to them. Their decisions were not born of ambition, but of a desperate, animal need to avoid becoming a victim. This constant struggle for dominance served Sauron's purpose perfectly. It ensured their loyalty was born not from genuine devotion, but from a primal fear of his overwhelming power and a twisted sense of belonging to the only structure that offered any order, however harsh. The ultimate stake for any individual orc was simple, brutal survival, a goal that required the complete surrender of any lingering spark of individual will. To live was to obey without question, yet even in this ordered darkness, a spark of ancient rebellion could sometimes flicker. Then came the great plagues and the breaking of the world. The Valar, the guardians of the world, intervened in the war against the Shadow, and their actions sent cataclysmic changes across Middle-earth. For the Orcs, this was not a war they could fight with swords. The very earth shook, and strange sicknesses swept through their crowded holds, illnesses that respected neither Uruk nor Snaga. These events were not targeted punishments, but vast, impersonal forces of nature that reshaped the land and its inhabitants. The Orc populations, once concentrated under the dark banner of Mordor, were suddenly shattered. Great clans were forced to flee their fortified pits, scattering into the wilds to escape the devastation. This great migration became a turning point in their hidden history, a moment of profound fragmentation that would define them for ages to come. Cut off from one another, these isolated tribes began to change in startling ways. An orc born in the deep, echoing caves of the misty mountains lived a life utterly different from one raised in the ash wastes of Mordor or the bitter cold of the White Mountains. Generations of isolation bred new forms. The mountain orcs developed broader hands for climbing and keener hearing for navigating absolute darkness. Their culture became one of stealth and ambush, their language a series of harsh whispers echoing through stone halls. Meanwhile, the Mordor breeds, still under the eye of Sauron's lieutenants, grew larger and more disciplined, their forms hardened by the open plains and the constant demand for military order. These physical changes were mirrored by deep cultural divides. A misty mountain orc clan saw the world as a place of tight tunnels and precious, hidden resources. A Mordor orc viewed it as a vast battlefield to be conquered. This fundamental difference in world, you made them strangers to one another, former kin, who now saw only rivals for a harsh world's meager spoils. These divisions often erupted into open, bloody warfare. A chance meeting between two clans in the wild could spark a vicious battle over hunting grounds or a long-forgotten grudge. They fought with a hatred sometimes more intense than what they held for elves or men, for this was a betrayal from within, a civil war in a people who had forgotten they were ever a single people. The great tragedy was that this infighting consumed their strength, leaving them weak and divided even as their numbers grew. In this new, broken world, the chieftains of these scattered tribes faced impossible choices. Some, fearing the power of the free peoples above, led their clans deeper into hiding, sealing themselves in forgotten mines and deep delvings, turning their backs on the wider world. Others, driven by desperation and a twisted need for dominance, chose the path of the raid, launching sudden, brutal attacks on isolated villages to seize food, weapons, and prisoners. Every decision was a calculation for survival in a world that offered no good options. This constant fragmentation made the Orcish people as a whole incredibly vulnerable, a collection of squabbling factions that could never again muster the unified force of the old legions. Yet it also made them dangerously unpredictable. A realm might secure its borders against the known threat from Mordor, only to be overrun by a previously unknown horde descending from the northern passes. From this seemingly endless chaos of warring clans and hidden chieftains, a singular figure would occasionally rise, a leader with the strength and will to unite the scattered tribes, if only for a little while. From this chaos of scattered tribes, one name rose with a force that would echo through the mountain halls for generations. Azog the Defiler was more than a chieftain. He was a storm given form. His power base was the ancient dwarf realm of Moria, which his people had occupied and made a stronghold of their own. For Azog, this was not merely a strategic home, it was a symbol of ultimate victory over his most hated foes. His personal vendetta against the dwarves of Durin's line was not just about territory, it was a deep, consuming fire. This burning pride led him to a single, terrible act that would change the course of history. When the dwarf king Thror, his mind clouded by a longing for his ancestral home, approached the gates of Moria alone, Azog saw his chance. This was not a military engagement, but a profoundly personal opportunity. The decision Azog made in that moment was calculated to do more than just end a life. He chose to desecrate the fallen king, a ceremonial practice of utter contempt meant to send a message that could not be ignored. By carving his own name into Thror's forehead, he transformed a king's, passing into a declaration of total war. The stakes of this act were immense, instantly escalating a long-standing rivalry into a blood feud that demanded a response in kind. For the dwarves, this was no longer a conflict over a lost mine. It was now about honor, memory, and the very soul of their people. The free peoples of Middle-earth watched as this single act of cruelty mobilized the entire dwarf nation, setting the stage for a conflict of unprecedented scale. The Great Battle of Azanulbizar was the direct and violent consequence, a clash so brutal it darkened the very valley where it was fought. Azog's legacy was thus sealed in fire and blood, a testament to how the will of one individual can bend the fate of many. And this legacy, this burning hatred, would not end with him. His son, Bolg, would inherit not just his position, but the all-consuming embers of his wrath. Saruman the White, a member of the very order meant to guide and protect Middle-earth, made a fateful decision in the silent halls of Isengard. He looked upon the ancient conflict and saw not a battle to be won with wisdom, but a power to be seized. Convinced that the future belonged to those who could master the tools of domination, he turned his gaze to the orcs, yet he found them flawed, too unruly, and too weakened by the sun. In the deep pits beneath his tower, he began a terrible work, cross-breeding the fiercest of the orc strains with captured men from the wild lands. This was not the crude torment of Morgoth, but a cold and calculated science of corruption. The result was a new breed of soldier, the Uruk-hai. They were taller, stronger, and possessed a terrifying discipline. Most crucially, they could endure the sunlight, a trait that broke the ancient advantage of the free peoples. Saruman, in his ambition, had not merely adopted the enemy's methods, he sought to perfect them. His decision to create life as a tool of war marked a profound moral descent, a betrayal of his sacred purpose that echoed the first dark experiments in Angband. The military balance of power shifted overnight, no longer confined to night raids or underground tunnels. This new army could march relentlessly by day and by night, a tide of industry and steel flowing from Isengard. The stakes for the kingdom of Rohan, and indeed for all free peoples, escalated to a terrifying degree. The very earth seemed to tremble with the rhythm of their war drums, a sound that promised not mindless rage, but efficient, calculated ruin. These new soldiers would soon be tested on the field of battle, their loyalty forged in the fires of industry. Their discipline was absolute, a chilling contrast to the chaotic snarl of Mordor's legions. In the deep forges and training yards of Isengard, the Uruk-hai were not merely trained, they were programmed. Every movement, every formation was drilled into them with a relentless, machine-like precision. They moved as a single, dark entity, their individual thoughts submerged beneath a collective will to obey. This was the orc, perfected not for freedom or even for cruelty's sake, but for pure, unthinking efficiency in war. Their creation was a deep perversion, a fusion of dark magic and a cold, industrial logic that twisted the natural order into something terrifyingly new. They felt no joy in the sun they could now endure, only a grim satisfaction in their own superior strength. This bred in them a profound sense of contempt for their lesser kin. To an Uruk-hai, the common orcs of Mordor were weak, undisciplined scavengers, relics of a bygone age of shadow. This rivalry was a constant, simmering tension that both Sauron and Saruman had to carefully manage, a dangerous game of stoking ambition without letting it erupt into open conflict. It was in this harsh new hierarchy that captains like Ugluk rose to power. His loyalty to Saruman was not a matter of choice, it was the core of his identity. When his mission required him to enforce his will upon other orcs, he did so without hesitation, his blade as ready for a disobedient Mordor orc as it was for a man of Rohan. This fierce, unwavering dedication made him and his kind more dangerous than any beast of pure instinct. The very existence of the Uruk-hai signaled a terrifying evolution in the ancient conflict. The shadow was no longer a mindless force of destruction. It was an intelligent, adapting enemy, capable of refining its own tools to a razor's edge. And it was this new breed that would lead the hunt for the ring bearer. The hunt for the ring transformed the orcs from a faceless army into relentless hunters. Bands of orcs, answering the call of two different masters, were unleashed upon the wild. From the grim gates of Mordor came Grishnak and his followers, their hearts filled with a bitter desire to please the Dark Lord Sauron. From the industrial pits of Isengard marched Ugluk and his Uruk-hai, their loyalty sworn to the traitor Saruman. Both groups were given the same vital command: find the halflings and retrieve the One Ring. This single objective placed them on a direct and violent collision course with the Fellowship of the Ring, turning the orcs into active, driving antagonists in the great story of the age. The fate of the world now rested not just on the heroism of the free peoples, but on the success or failure of these hunting parties. Their pursuit was complicated by a deep-seated rivalry that often boiled over into open conflict. Grishnak, a creature of shadow and cunning, viewed the Uruk-hai as blunt instruments, lacking subtlety. Ugluk, in turn, saw the Mordor orcs as weak and untrustworthy. This internal strife created a dangerous unpredictability as the two groups fought each other with as much ferocity as they pursued their quarry. The decision by Ugluk's band to capture the hobbits Merry and Pippin was a pivotal moment. It was not a random act of violence, but a calculated move to secure the prize for Saruman. This single choice set in motion a chain of events that would lead directly to the great battle of the Hornburg, drawing the forces of Rohan into a desperate fight for survival. Their relentless chase across the plains was a testament to a grim determination, a shadow that would not be shaken, and this shadow was now closing in on one of the last great strongholds of men, The night at Helm's Deep was shattered by the relentless rhythm of 10,000 Uruk-hai shields pounding against the earth. This was not the chaotic charge of old, but the advance of a machine, a wall of black iron and pure intent, moving with a terrifying synchronization. Under the command of their captains, they did not simply rush the walls, they tested them. Every decision was a chilling display of tactical intelligence. They identified the weak point in the deeping wall with a sapper's eye, and their use of a fiery explosive was not an act of random destruction, but a precise, calculated breach. Siege ladders rose not in a haphazard wave, but in coordinated assaults meant to stretch the defenders thin. For the people of Rohan, trapped within the Hornburg, this was a confrontation with a new kind of enemy. It was not a battle against wild beasts, but against a cold, industrial will that felt no fear and acknowledged no retreat. The hope of the free peoples was pressed against the stone, their arrows seeming to vanish into an endless tide of disciplined hatred. Each moment of that long, desperate night felt like it could be the last for an entire kingdom, its fate balanced on the edge of a sword. But as a pale, gray dawn finally broke over the soaked battlefield, a new sound was heard. Not the roar of orcs, but the deep, rustling charge of the Huorns. From the darkened plains of Gorgoroth, a shadow began to move. It was not a weather front or a trick of the light, but an army of a scale that had not been seen since the elder days. This was Sauron's final gambit, the full and terrible might of Mordor, unleashed in a single, grinding march. The earth itself trembled under the boots of countless orcs, the heavy tread of armored trolls, and the disciplined ranks of Easterling allies. Their target was the white city of Minas Tirith, the last great bastion of the kingdom of Gondor. For the free peoples, this was no longer a skirmish or a raid. This was the beginning of the final, climactic struggle for the very soul of Middle-earth. The movement of this host signaled a point of no return, a confrontation that would decide the fate of every race for ages to come. As the dust cloud on the horizon grew larger, a palpable sense of dread settled over the defenders lining the city's white walls. They were not just facing an army, they were facing an idea, the seemingly inevitable triumph of a shadow that sought to extinguish all light. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the force made individual acts of bravery feel like drops in an ocean of darkness. Hope itself became a scarce and precious resource, guarded fiercely in the hearts of those who refused to surrender. To command this vast and varied host, Sauron appointed his most ruthless lieutenants. The orc captain Gothmog was given authority over the siege, a being whose strategic mind was as cold and sharp as the blade he carried. His decisions were not born of blind rage, but of a calculated intent to shatter the city's spirit. He understood that to break Minas Tirith, he must first break its gates. Under his command, the great battering ram Grond was brought forward, a machine of immense size and terrible power. Its wolf-like head, forged in the fires of Mount Doom and imbued with dark sorcery. Each thunderous impact against the ancient gate was not just an assault on wood and iron. It was a psychological blow, a reminder to every defender that their strongest defenses were crumbling. While Grond hammered at the main entrance, his forces simultaneously scaled the walls with relentless siege towers and ladders, creating a multi-front assault that stretched the city's guardians to their absolute limit. The stakes in this single battle could not have been higher. This was the Shadow's ultimate escalation, a direct and overwhelming challenge to the last remnants of the Age of Light. A victory for Mordor would not merely mean the fall of a city, it would usher in an age of unending darkness, a time where memory of trees and starlight would fade into myth, and the dominion of the Dark Lord would be absolute. Every sword raised in defense of the White Walls was a stand against that future. Before the gates of the White City, the greatest battle of the age would be joined, a maelstrom of fire, steel, and desperate courage, where the fate of all things would be decided. The fields before Minas Tirith became a sea of churning steel and desperate cries. Orc legions swarmed across the Pelennor, not in orderly ranks now, but in a furious, chaotic tide, crashing against the lines of Gondor and the arriving riders of Rohan. This was not a battle of grand strategy, but a sprawling, brutal struggle for survival, where every individual fought in their own private storm of fear and violence. For the common orc soldier, the cause of Sauron was a distant, abstract thing. Their motivation was far more primal, a deep-seated bloodlust, honed by generations of conflict, and a terrifying fear of the punishment that awaited any who fled. They fought with a desperate ferocity, knowing that to turn back was to face the blade of their own captains, while to press forward was to meet the spear of a Rohirrim. This created a maelstrom of individual combats, a grim dance where the only goal was to outlive the orc next to you. The air grew thick with the din of clashing weapons and the scent of overturned earth, a sensory overload of pure chaos. In the midst of this, a pivotal shift occurred. The Witch King, their supreme commander, fell not to a mighty warrior, but through a combination of destiny and a hobbit's courage. His passing sent a psychic shockwave through the orc ranks, a sudden and profound loss of the dark will that had been driving them forward. The ensuing rout was catastrophic. Without their central authority, their discipline shattered completely, and the once relentless horde became a terrified mob scrambling for any escape. The cost was immense on all sides, a day of profound loss that darkened the very soil of the fields. This defeat shattered the main military power of Sauron, breaking the back of his most numerous armies and proving his force could be overcome. That crucial victory made the final, desperate push toward the Black Gate not just a possibility, but a necessity. With their great army broken and scattered, the fate of every remaining orc now became inextricably tied to the survival of the Dark Tower itself, the solitary source of the power that gave their world order. Far beneath the mountains of Mordor, in a single, silent moment, everything changed. The One Ring, the anchor of Sauron's very being, dissolved into the fire from which it was born. The effect was not gradual, it was instantaneous, a wave of pure negation that rippled out from the heart of Orodruin. High above the plains, the dark tower of Barad-dûr, its foundations woven with the very sorcery of the ring, gave a great groan. Its immense structure, which had stood for an age as a symbol of unassailable power, shuddered from its pinnacle to its deepest roots. Then, with a roar that drowned out the final cries of battle, it collapsed in upon itself, a mountain of black stone and broken will, crashing down into a cloud of dust and ruin. The shadow that had pressed upon the world for so long simply lifted, and with its passing, the will that had driven the orc legions forward was extinguished. Across the vast battlefield before the Black Gate, and in every hold and outpost throughout Middle-earth, a profound and terrifying silence fell upon them. The fire of command in their minds, a presence that had been as constant as a heartbeat, was gone, They stood frozen, weapons slipping from their hands, as a deep existential confusion washed over them. For generations, their entire purpose had been fed to them by a greater power. Their hatred, their marching orders, their very reason for existing was tied to that dark tower. Now, with it gone, they were untethered, adrift in a sudden and absolute void. The only instinct that remained, sharp and primal, was the will to survive. There was no rallying, no last stand. The great army shattered into 1,000 fleeing fragments. They scrambled over the fallen rocks of their own fortress, their only decision to escape the wrath of the victorious armies and the blinding sunlight that now felt more exposing than ever. The end of the War of the Ring meant the end of their world-threatening unity. They would never again muster under a single dark banner. Into the deep places of the world they fled, a broken people without a purpose, their story receding from the great tales of light and into the forgotten shadows of the earth. The great shadow had passed, but its children remained. In the long years of the Fourth Age, the surviving orcs did not vanish, they simply retreated. They scattered into the deepest, most forgotten corners of Middle-earth, fleeing the sunlight and the triumphant songs of the free peoples. Their migration was a quiet, desperate exodus into the earth itself. They sought out the deepest, most played-out mines, the highest and most inaccessible mountain peaks, and the trackless, sunless depths of the oldest forests. There, in the perpetual twilight of their new homes, they became something different. No longer a conquering army, they were reduced to a lingering echo of a fallen power. In the tales told by men and elves, they slowly transformed from a world-ending threat into something more manageable, more folkloric. They became the dangerous beasts that haunted the edges of the map, the bogeymen whose names were whispered to children to keep them from wandering too far into the woods after dark. Their primary conflict was no longer one of domination, but a brutal, daily struggle for survival. They now fought against the reclaiming forces of nature itself, against the bitter cold of high altitudes, the damp rot of deep delvings, and the scarcity of food in barren lands. The free peoples, busy rebuilding their own kingdoms, became an occasional, terrifying hazard rather than a primary enemy, a force that would root them out if they were discovered. Faced with this new reality, the small, isolated tribes made a unanimous and somber decision. Their choice was to hide, to avoid all contact, and to burrow ever deeper into the wild. They lived in constant fear of a stray footprint or a wisp of cookfire smoke giving away their position. This decision to withdraw from the world was not a strategic retreat, but a slow, generational surrender. Their numbers, no longer replenished by dark industry or great armies, began a long, inevitable decline. The stakes for their people were now existential, a quiet battle against their own eventual extinction. Some small bands may have been absorbed by the wild, their bloodlines thinning into the lineages of other, lesser creatures of shadow. Over the long, slow turning of the years, their presence faded from the grand chronicles of history, their story shrinking from epic tragedy to mere local legend. They became whispers in the mountain wind and shadows that moved just beyond the firelight, a fading memory of a people who were, themselves, a memory of a far greater sorrow. And so they faded from history, becoming whispers and shadows. A lone traveler in the misty mountains might still hear it on the wind, a guttural cry echoing from a high pass, a sound that vanishes as quickly as it comes. In the deepest woods, a forester might stumble upon a circle of blackened stones, the remnants of an old fire, and beside it, a crudely forged blade left to rust. These are the echoes in the dark, the faint but persistent reminders of a shadow that was, and a price that was paid for the peace of the Fourth Age. They linger at the edges of the known world, challenging the comfortable stories told in the great halls of men and elves. This presents a new conflict, not of swords, but of memory itself. How should the free peoples remember the orcs? Was their existence a tale of pure, unreasoning evil to be condemned and forgotten, or a profound tragedy of a people broken and remade by a darkness greater than themselves? The decision made by the new generations carries immense weight, for it will shape the very soul of the ages to come. To remember them only as monsters risks hardening the hearts of the free peoples, closing them off to the complexities of sorrow and corruption. Yet, to forget the real suffering they caused is to dishonor the memory of those who fell. The stakes are the future morality of Middle-earth, a choice between a legacy of simple hatred or one of hard-won wisdom. This tension between forgetting and remembering lingers in every quiet corner of the wild. But what of that very beginning, that first terrible moment when light was taken and remade into shadow? The origin of the orcs remains the deepest and most sorrowful mystery of all. This question of redemption hangs heavy in the air long after the last echoes of war have faded. Could a being born from sorrow and shaped by hatred ever truly choose a different path? The history we have traced is not a simple chronicle of heroes and villains, but a far more complex story of corruption and consequence. It forces us to confront difficult ideas about the nature of choice itself. Were the orcs forever bound by the darkness woven into their creation, or did a spark of that original, unspoiled, will remain, buried deep beneath layers of malice and fear? This internal conflict now becomes our own, a quiet struggle with the meaning of free will. We must ask ourselves if a life defined by hardship and a legacy of violence can ever be overcome. The story offers no simple resolution, no forgotten scroll that reveals a single, comforting truth. Instead, it leaves this profound mystery with us, a decision for each listener to weigh in their own heart. The moral stakes of the entire epic are elevated, transforming it from a mere history into a mirror for our own understanding of guilt, forgiveness, and the potential for change. What does it mean to be truly free if your very nature was forged in a prison? Can a spirit, once broken, ever be made whole again? Perhaps in the deepest, most silent cavern, far from the sun and the memory of war, a lone orc pauses. In the steady drip of water on stone, it hears a faint, haunting melody, a distant echo of the world's first song, and for a moment, a forgotten feeling stirs, not of rage, but of a profound and bewildering wonder. Deep in a forgotten cave, the last keeper of their history draws a final, ragged breath. He is an ancient shaman, his form twisted by time, his mind a fragile vessel for the shattered songs of his people. For generations, he has whispered the chronicles of their suffering, a bitter oral history passed down through the long darkness. His stories were not of light and music, but of fiery pits and the gleaming swords of elves, a narrative woven entirely from loss and the sharp sting of betrayal. He was the final thread, connecting the scattered remnants of his people to a past they could no longer fully remember, a living archive of grievance. and as his life fades, that thread is severed forever. The last coherent memory of the orcs, however distorted by generations of hatred, is extinguished in that silent cavern. The consequence is absolute. From this moment on, the story of the orcs belongs solely to their conquerors. Their history is no longer their own, but a tale told by their enemies in the great halls of men and elves, a chronicle where they feature only as monsters and mindless foot soldiers. The final, quiet conflict is not over land or power, but over memory itself, a struggle between a people's own painful truth and the absolute silence of oblivion. In his last moments, the shaman makes a final, defining choice. He does not whisper a plea for understanding or sing a forgotten song of Cuvianen. He gathers the last of his strength and curses the names of elves and men, his voice a dry rasp echoing against the stone. This decision solidifies his people's legacy for all time, cementing it as one of undying, implacable hatred. It is a tragic, circular act, answering the perceived hatred of the world with a hatred of his own, ensuring that the only emotion his people are remembered for is the very one that consumed them. The ultimate stake in this quiet, lonely passing is the truth itself. A multifaceted history of sorrow, corruption, and fractured identity becomes a simple casualty of the long war, a lost perspective that simplifies a profound tragedy into a mere battle between good and evil. The complex reasons behind their marring, the internal struggles of generations, the small, quiet acts of survival in a world that offered no mercy, all of it vanishes with that last breath. And so the tale of the orcs ends, not with a climactic battle or a shouted defiance, but with a fading whisper, a silence that falls over their story forever. The fire has dwindled to a soft bed of glowing embers, and the tale is told. But history is a story told by the survivors, by the hands that held the quill and wrote the chronicles of their own victory. The true story of Middle-earth is far more layered than a simple bedtime tale of light conquering dark. It is a tapestry woven with threads of profound sorrow, of choices made under shadow, and of people who were given no good paths to walk. This leaves us with a quiet tension, a choice between the comfort of a simple legend and the more difficult, somber truth of a tragic history. I have made my decision tonight to share not a story of triumph, but one of remembrance for a broken people. The true stake in this telling is not in the battles of the past, but in the perspective we carry forward. It is an invitation to look beyond the simple labels of monster and hero, and to feel the weight of a world where even shadows have a history. Now sleep, and may your dreams be lighter than the histories of old. That final whisper fades into the mountain stone, and with it, our journey reaches its quiet end. We have walked a path from starlit shores to the deepest, most forgotten caves, tracing not a line of heroes, but a scar across the history of a world. The tragedy of the orcs is not a simple one, and it offers no easy answers, only the somber weight of a story too often left untold. By choosing to listen, to look into that shadow, you have done more than just hear a tale. You have offered a form of remembrance. In the act of seeking to understand a people defined by their sorrow, you have kindled a small but significant light. That light does not excuse the darkness, but it allows us to see its true shape, to recognize that even the most maligned corners of a story have their own painful logic. Middle-earth itself feels more complete, more real, when we acknowledge these complex layers, when we allow its history to be not just a chronicle of victory, but a tapestry woven with threads of profound loss. The philosophical questions will remain, echoing in the quiet spaces of your mind long after this story ends. But for now, take this understanding as a gentle gift. May it rest lightly on your thoughts, and may your own path be guided by a compassion that sees even the darkest histories not with fear, but with a quiet, reverent curiosity. Sleep well, and may your dreams be peaceful.
you.